grasp them have to employ symbolic, metaphoric, analogical language, things that are not accepted by certain criteria of truth today in the academic world, but they are absolutely essential for faith. And it's in this context that the changeless heavens, I think, functioned as symbols by way of which people felt that they were grasped by that which is most perfect. So what happens in modern science, modern astronomy and modern science in general, is that this powerful symbol through which people had been grasped by that which is most excellent, by that which is perfect, has now begun to unravel. And this is why it's not surprising that there's a kind of religious anxiety that accompanies the tearing of that classic fabric. This hierarchical universe also provided a very convenient and adventurous map for the spiritual journey. A classic example of this is St. Bonaventure's itinerary or journey of the mind into God. Bonaventure, like Augustine and Aquinas and many others, had assumed a hierarchical view of the universe, which goes back to Plato and Aristotle and Plotinus, transformed by Augustine, and Bonaventure was very Augustinian. And the idea is that the purpose of our life, the meaning of our life, what gives adventure to our lives, is this journey of climbing toward or struggling toward or allowing ourselves to be grasped by the perfection, which would require detachment from the lower levels so that you could find eventual communion with the divine. And I think if we're honest about it, most those of us who are committed to particular religious traditions, certainly the Catholic tradition, this hierarchical view still functions, at least tacitly, to shape our religious and ethical sensibilities. And every ethical system in the world, even those that are allegedly secular, still adhere roughly to the standards of values that correspond to this traditional hierarchy. So it's been a very, very important part of the shaping of consciousness and life and spirituality in human history. It promotes what we might call an otherworldly type of spirituality, and an extreme form of that, not one that's always present, but an extreme form of this spirituality of detachment, divides reality into the two spheres of spirit and matter. Spirit is God's dwelling place, and that's the only realm where really important things are going on, such as the transformation of the soul in its itinerary, its journey into God. The world of the spirit was considered by this spirituality of detachment to be the soul's true home and final destiny, whereas the realm of matter was the realm of nature and bodily existence, and in modern times it became the realm that science is interested in. Matter was considered to be the ultimate reason for death in some spiritualities, not all by any means, and suffering and evil desires, and the soul's place of exile, trial, and purification. So it's not surprising that people would think that in this material world, since nothing of significance is working itself out, there has been, wherever this spirituality has been present, there has been a kind of indifference to science. And I think Catholics even today have to ask the question, why Catholicism is often criticized for not sponsoring the greatest scientific minds that are present in modern scientific history. Why is that? This is something I think at least we have to bring into the conversation. But that's not my main point. What I want to do is say, let's now come into the early 21st century and look at the universe that science is giving us, and then ask some very serious questions about it. Whenever I give a talk on science and religion, I like to use this image to give us a sense of the scale of the contemporary 13.8 billion year old universe that scientists are talking about, to imagine that you have on your bookshelf 30 big books, and each of those books is 450 pages long. Each page stands for 1 million years in the story. The Big Bang takes place on page 1 of volume 1, but you'll notice that the first 2 shelves and part of the third consist of what seems to be essentially lifeless and mindless physical stuff and processes. Life was not in a hurry to come into the universe. And the universe, or the Earth rather, spins out with the other planets around the sun about 4.5 billion years ago. And a little less than a billion years later, 3.8 billion years ago, the first signs of life begin to flame up, but not terribly enthusiastically. And life remains at a very simple, mostly unicellular state until you get almost to the end of volume 29, around page 520, or 520 million years ago, the Cambrian explosion takes place. And then dinosaurs, which we associate with Paleological antiquity, don't come in until after the middle of volume 30. The dinosaurs go extinct on page 385, and this opens up the possibility for the first time of mammals having their day and beginning to flourish. So, and eventually mammals become, by way of evolution, our primate ancestors, and then 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 pages from the end of volume 30, our hominid ancestors show up. When do anatomically modern descendants of Cro-Magnon humanity, that's us, when do we show up in this scientific picture? Only on the last 5th, and maybe even only the last 10th of the very last page of the very last volume. This is when, for the first time, intelligence, self-reflective consciousness in any case, ethical aspiration, and our faith traditions come onto the scene. So if you're a thoughtful person today, you can't help asking, and especially if you are theologically interested to boot, you can't help asking the question, what in the world is going on here? And what does this have to do? Just imagine if John Donne were here today. Bertrand Russell quipped that if the point of this story is to produce intelligence, then why did it take so long to produce so little? In any case, if you're theologically interested, you can't help asking the question, where do I locate God, if at all? What should we be doing with our lives? The classic vertical, static, hierarchical view told us very clearly that we need to practice virtues which allow us to become detached from the material world that drags us down. So what is the place of virtue? What is the reason that we can give for a vigorous, a robust, moral life? What is the meaning of virtue in this kind of world? And back to my question, to what can we now lift up our hearts in any way comparably intense as the spiritual fervor that was possible when people thought of the universe only in a static, vertical, hierarchical way? A real crisis, I think, is upon us, and we're still so deeply involved in this, and it's still so new to us. And I think this is really one of the main issues in science and religion. How do we map the traditional hierarchical fervor onto this horizontalized picture of matter? Because notice what happened to the hierarchy. The hierarchy, the classic hierarchy, has now been flattened. It's now collapsed or pancaked. So that matter, which was lifeless and mindless matter, which was the lowest level in the classic hierarchy, now becomes the dominant feature in this new cosmography. And life sort of sneaks accidentally onto the scene very late, and mind seems to come in as a kind of cosmic afterthought. And meaning, which was the highest level of all, in the traditional hierarchy, now in much modern and postmodern thinking seems to many people to be self-evidently nothing more than a fiction that the forlorn human mind projects out onto this fundamentally impersonal universe. I don't have time today to talk about what happens in the last row of volumes when, after life comes about, Darwinian processes take over. And the Darwinian recipe for evolution includes the three ingredients of lots of accidents, the impersonality of natural selection, and lots of time, which to a certain kind of mentality, including the religious mentality, seems to be a lot of wasted centuries and millennia. Why did God fool around for so long before bringing about or allowing life to appear on the scene, and then at the end, mind? So you can see what a crisis this kind of picture of nature produces in minds that have been shaped by the classic hierarchical view of the universe. 'Tis all in pieces, at least for many people. All coherence gone. So it leads then to the question that I mentioned a while ago. Can you map the classic spiritual longing and a sense of meaning and adventure that went with that classic spiritual way of looking at things? Can you map it onto the new cosmic story in such a way that if you are religious or theologically inclined, you can honestly and fully embrace the natural world as it's being given to us by science? Well, with that background and with those thoughts in mind, I found it very interesting when I was rethinking the Second Vatican Council a couple years ago and what it implies, to come across these lines in Gaudium et Spes, that is the Second Vatican Council's pastoral constitution on the church in the modern world, and find that the council, official Catholic teaching, seemed to fully embrace this new evolutionary picture of the universe. Here's what Gaudium et Spes says. The human race has passed from a rather static concept of reality to a more dynamic evolutionary one. In consequence, there has arisen a new series of problems calling for new efforts of analysis and synthesis. And I had to ask myself how much analysis and synthesis has been going on in Catholic thought since the Second Vatican Council that would be a response, a positive response to this call by the Council. And then the document goes on to say that a hope related to the end of time, that is, hope for ultimate fulfillment of all things, for communion with God, does not diminish the importance of intervening duties, meaning our actions in the world here and now, but rather undergirds the acquittal of them with fresh incentives. In other words, an evolutionary worldview can give a kind of meaning to human action and by implication to human virtue, to the practice of the moral life, as well as the spiritual life, and does not necessarily detract from it at all. And then the Council says that we therefore have the obligation to, notice these words, to build the world. I don't know that any previous Catholic document had put things this way. There are a lot of great ironies here. The first question I wanted to ask them, where did these ideas come from? Why this sudden change, this sudden warming up to evolution? After many, many decades in which Catholicism, although it never condemned evolution, had never really warmed up to it either. In 1950, Pope Pius XII